Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this update of CEMBUREAU's 2050 roadmap. CEMBUREAU representing the European cement industry. My name is Sonja van Rensen. I have the pleasure of moderating the next hour and a half for you. I'm the former editor-in-chief of Energy Monitor, a website dedicated to the global energy transition, and a freelance energy, climate, and environment journalist based in Brussels. So what's this webinar going to focus on? CEMBUREAU has issued a new version of its 2050 roadmap. The earlier edition dates back to almost exactly 4 years ago, May 2020. And what we want to focus on here is the new and bolstered ambitions for 2030 and 2050, including an entirely new projection for 2040. Secondly, the key technology levers that CEMBUREAU envisages as essential for decarbonising the sector in the next decades, the need for cooperation throughout the value chain to make that happen, and finally, the policy framework that they say is needed to realise all of this. In terms of structure, we're going to hear from CEMBUREAU, two representatives from the organisation first to talk us through the roadmap. Then we're going to get a reaction from the European Commission, and we're going to move into a Q&A for the second part of the webinar. It'll be easy for you to ask questions. You should see an orange button in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen called Ask a Question. So your questions will come through to me, and we'll try and take as many of those as we can. Finally, today's webinar is being recorded, so you can always go back and listen a second time if you wish. With that, we're going to kick off, perhaps unusually, with a question to you before we come to our panel. If we could display our first poll question. What we're asking you is, which of these technology levers do you think is most critical to decarbonise the cement sector? You've got 7 to choose from. You'll need to scroll down probably to see the full array on your screen, and you'll need to select one, just one, and you'll need to click Submit at the end of that, and your results will come through to me. We're going to leave that open during our first intervention and come to the results in about 10 minutes or so. Our first speaker then, I'd like to welcome Koen Koppenholle, the CEO of CEMBUREAU. Koen has headed up the organisation for the past 12 years, so was also very much involved in the first edition of the roadmap back in 2020. Koen, what's new and why now?
Well, thank you, Sonja, and good afternoon, everybody. I will give a twofold answer to the question, why now? First of all, compared to 2020, and it's true, it's only 4 years ago, but we are in the process, also national associations who have their own roadmaps, also companies have their own roadmaps. We're in the process of executing these roadmaps. We're looking at technological development, we're looking at investments, and we have projects in place. And a first issue that we learned from all of this is that we want to take stock at this moment on where do we stand compared to what we put forward as an ambition in 2020, where are we going to move to, but also we have been able to determine with a greater level of granularity what we need from a regulatory perspective, from a financing perspective, and that is important also from an infrastructure perspective. So all these requests are coming forward, and that ties into the second part of my answer. We are part, and we want to be part of the European agenda. There will be a lot of discussion going forward. We had the Fit for 55 package that has been largely executed, but we're looking at a reform of the ETS going forward. The carbon removals legislation needs to be further rolled out. And we have also a discussion that will start on the 2040 targets for the European Union. We have here a blueprint with our roadmap. We want to be part of that debate. We want to see how we can contribute as a cement sector, and we want to see how we can accelerate the investments. But for that, and that's an important part of our roadmap update, is that we're looking at the right regulatory framework that needs to be put in place.
Okay, thank you. And how would you say the sector's ambitions have changed compared to back in 2020?
Yeah, before looking into the ambition, the changed ambition, let me just highlight one point. We are indeed the cement industry. Clinker and cement production is our core activity. But throughout the decarbonisation pathway that we have set out over the past years, we've always looked at the full value chain approach. And that is known now as what we call our 5C approach. So you have the first two Cs, which is indeed clinker and cement, but then most of the cement is used in concrete. That's the third C. And then we have indeed most of the cement going into construction. That's the fourth C. And then we add also the fifth C, and that is very important in the sense that everybody talks about CO2 emissions release during the manufacturing process of cement, but not many people are aware that actually the reverse situation happens, and there is a uptake of CO2 from the air into the cement based in concrete during the lifetime of a built structure and also afterlife of the built structure. And we want to see that recognized. We want to see that recognized as part of a decarbonisation journey. So this 5C approach, full value chain approach, is important. Now, when you're asking where is the increased ambition for the cement industry specifically, and Rob will go into more detail on these three levers. And I'm talking about levers because there's a variety of levers that can be used by the cement companies to go on a path to decarbonisation. And it's up to each company to choose its strategy, to choose its pathway. But actually, it is looking at, for instance, alternative fuel use. That is where the ambition is increased. Clinker to cement ratio is also an area where we have an increased ambition. And then the third area, also based on a series of projects that have now been under the Innovation Fund, been eligible for funding, but also more projects in the pipeline, carbon capture and use, carbon capture and storage. And that allows us to indeed go to an increased ambition for 2030. We were at 30% in the previous roadmap. We now have a 37%. We were at 40% down the value chain, now 50%. As Sonja just indicated, we also added the 2040 ambition, and that is now going to 78% over cement and 93% down the value chain. Again, coming back to cement, that allows us to go to net zero emissions over cement by 2050. And then as a logical consequence, and then again going into the value chain approach, as a logical consequence of that, there is a potential to go to negative emissions over the value chain. But I would add to all of that, that is all dependent upon and conditional upon the right regulatory framework being in place.
Okay, there's ambition and there's delivery. So I think for me, the obvious next question would be, how do you expect to deliver on these ambitions, and what have you delivered in the last 4 years that makes you optimistic about the path forward?
Well, what makes me very optimistic is that indeed the number of projects, I just referred to it, and it's what you will see in the updated roadmap. We have a description of a lot of projects for each of these 5 Cs. So all the levers across the value chain, we have identified and described the projects. We have indicated the way in which our emissions can be reduced. And I think that's a very strong focus. And that's not only, and again, as I said before, it's for each company to build its own strategy. But what we do see is that we do see an evolution across all the companies and across all geographies within Europe. So all of the European plants are operating against a decarbonisation pathway, which is, I think, a very interesting and very encouraging development. When I'm looking into the learnings, we have innovation projects where we can learn from, and that we will take into new innovation, new analysis. As I said, we're going to look at sources for alternative fuels, alternative raw materials. We're going to look into substituting cementitious materials. Where are they available and what can we do going forward? And then also at ways of using the CO2 as a feedstock. That also has its regulatory requirements. But I would say with all of this, we also position ourselves not only on the agenda of CO2 emission reduction, but also squarely within the debate on a circular economy. And I think that's another important part. The cement industry is really part and parcel of a circular economy approach.
Okay, the fourth and final question, I think, for this opening round, at least to you then, Koen. What policies do you need to deliver on these ambitions? You've already said the regulatory framework is crucial. We're coming to the end of a political cycle, the opening of a new one. What are your main asks at this point in time?
Well, that's also one of the main reasons, as I said, why we put this update of the roadmap right now, is because we have a new European Parliament coming in. There will be a new Commission in the fall, and actually the work program of the Commission is now in preparation. So we want to focus on 4 areas, and I will go a little bit more in detail on each of these areas. The first of one is, of course, the competitiveness environment. Second, I would talk about ramping up financial support. 3, access to infrastructure. And 4, creating lead markets for low-carbon products. Let me just go into each of these. I said deliberately competitiveness environment, because we are signatures of the Antwerp Declaration. We find it very important that the momentum on the Green Deal is maintained. We are executing, as I said, and therefore we need to have legal certainty on the Green Deal. But we also have to make sure that there is an industrial deal that is accompanying that Green Deal. And that's why I'm saying competitiveness is essential. But one of the important elements in that competitiveness for us, and we've always been a staunch supporter of it, is the carbon border adjustment mechanism. The carbon border adjustment mechanism that allows us to operate on a level playing field with third country operators, and allows us, in fact, to invest in Europe and to make sound investments and have a business case for the decarbonization process in Europe. Important for the carbon border adjustment mechanism is its effectiveness. It needs to be watertight. We need to cooperate with the customs authorities at national level. Many of our national associations are doing that. And I would also say that a very important part of the jigsaw, which is still missing at this moment, is we do need a solution for exports. I think that's something that we addressed with the Commission several times, not only us, but also other sectors. I think this is really something that requires a solution. The second point is indeed the financing, ramping up financing. I think it's very important when we talk about financing that thank you for indeed the Innovation Fund. I think that's positive. The Innovation Fund has helped forward a lot of our projects in the cement sector. But at the same time, we do have the Innovation Fund, which has been largely oversubscribed. I mean, we do have a lot of projects in the pipeline. And in the Innovation Fund, you need, for each of the projects, you need to prove that you have an innovative element compared to the previous project. We would like to see in reforming the Innovation Fund that we could go to a deployment fund, because that's where we are, as I said in the beginning. We are deploying the technologies, so I think it's important to turn it into a deployment fund. The second proposal, and that may be somewhat of a bold proposal, is that we will be paying till 2034, and that is based on assumptions we made, between 80 and 100 billion euros into the EU ETS. We would like to see 75% of that being front-loaded right now into what we call a cement fund, which is dedicated to the cement industry and allows the projects to be funded and allows the decarbonization for our industry. That's a very important request that we have going forward. And then I would say a last point on the funding would be a point related to the administration of the funding. We would like to see not only CAPEX covered, but also OPEX. I think we will have increased electricity costs for our projects. But we would also like to see a one-stop shop application procedure. For the moment, we have a combination of national funding, European funding, different criteria, different timelines sometimes. So a simplification of that whole application process is something that we would like to engage on with the European Commission, again, from a perspective of contributing to the debate as a sector. The third area is then the area of infrastructure, and that's broad in the sense that if we are developing carbon capture projects, we're looking at carbon capture and use, carbon capture and storage. For the storage, we need the pipelines, we need the storage sites. But actually, when we're talking about financing, that is de-risking the full value chain, but not only from a financing perspective, also from an operational perspective. If I'm looking at the Innovation Fund, there are 10 projects for the cement sector, but 21 partners in these projects, which are more people in the value chain. We're talking completely new value chains where all the actors in that value chain need to work together. And that includes, for instance, the criteria for CO2 going into the pipelines, the quality of the CO2 going into the pipelines. So these are important issues that need to be resolved. Another issue in terms of access for us is important, continued access to alternative fuels, alternative raw materials. That is essential to reduce our recourse to fossil fuels. Access to substituting cementitious materials is very important. And then the last point I would say is access to electricity and low carbon electricity at reasonable prices. As we said before, our electricity demand will double, triple, and 5 times be as high as now, depending on what technology we use. But that's going to be a very important demand going forward. And that brings me to the last bucket of policy demands, and that is the lead markets for low carbon products. We're all looking into public procurement rules that can allow us to bring low carbon products to market. Standardization is an important element in the equation, but I would say there is a discussion about composition-based standards and the development of performance-based standards. We are part of that discussion. It's important to make sure that we combine the bringing to market of low carbon products also with the attention for resilience and safety of the end product. I think that balance and striking that balance is of crucial importance. And I would again go back to lead markets and CO2. CO2 in construction products, CO2 use in construction products is very important, but it brings me back to the circular economy idea. I think the whole discussion on carbon use is still, from a regulatory perspective, not very clear, and then we can go into that into more detail. But there we have a lack of legal certainty when it comes to CO2 use, not only for the construction markets, it's pretty clear, I hope, for the moment, but when it comes to CO2 use for aviation fuels or for chemical products, we still have uncertainty, and that needs to be resolved as well. So I would keep it at that, Sonia.
Okay, thank you very much. A long line of policy asks, and we're going to come to the European Commission in a moment to get some feedback on how many of these are likely to be forthcoming and in what shape and form over the next couple of years. But first we're going to turn to Rob van der Meer, who's CEMBUREAU's Industrial Policy Director, one of the co-authors of this updated roadmap, previously with Heidelberg Cements, who has been in the sector also for a considerable amount of time. Rob is going to talk us through in a little bit more detail the technology levers that CEMBUREAU sees as essential to decarbonisation. And before he kicks off, I'm just going to have a look and let you know the results that came in from the poll, since that was asking exactly this question. What lever do you think is most important to decarbonise cement in the coming years? And I can let you know, and Rob, obviously feel free to comment on this as you start talking in a moment. Most of you have said that carbon capture, use and storage, more than 50% of you have said, 54% to be exact, have said that that is for you the key lever. Second, with 21%, so a way back, but still considerable, a fifth of you have said reducing the clinker to cement ratio you see as most important. And third is collaboration across the value chain with 12%. All the others were below the 10% threshold. So those are the top three, I would say. Rob, as I said, feel free to comment and then tell us in this new edition of the roadmap which technology levers have changed compared to 4 years ago, why, and what does that mean?
Yeah, okay, thank you, Sonia. Let's start with the poll, because it's interesting. For me, from a technical perspective, I don't think that we should limit ourselves to only one technology or two technologies as the key drivers for the carbon neutrality, for the net zero future of the cement industry. I'm sorry, we need them all. And I think that most of the plants will also, so we have identified, as CEMBUREAU, we have identified in the past the 5 C's mentioned by Koen. That is from clinker, cement, to construction, to the concrete, and at the end, carbonation. All these levers and all the measures that we have identified in our roadmap, I think most of the cement plants in Europe will use them all. So there is not a single choice. For sure, carbon capture is very important. And the reason is that when you produce cement from limestone, and you can't produce cement without limestone, it's that simple, you have always process emissions. And these process emissions should be captured. You should do something with it. You can reduce the process emissions by using alternative raw materials in the clinker production, but you can't avoid that process emissions. So that is one of the reasons that the cement sector is seen as a hard-to-abate sector. The second point, clinker to cement ratio, I would like to see that really going down much further than it's today. But the key challenge that we have, and I will come back on that, is the availability of the materials that you need for that. I will come back on that later. So we have in our roadmap now a decrease, or in fact, sorry, an increase of the use of clinker substitutes in cement, and a significant improvement still compared to some other values that people are mentioning all around. It is good, but not comparable. And the reason is really the scalability of that technology. The fact that the materials will not be available in 2050 will limit the use. And now I come to the key question, in fact, the question that you raised. What is changed compared to before? The first part of this is that this is not a revision of our roadmap. So the 2020 roadmap that we issued 4 years ago, we have kept it. We only updated 3 parts of the roadmap. We of course updated the policy framework and all the things related to that, because a lot is changing in European framework on climate change. So for that we had to change, but on the technology perspective we have focused on only 3. The first one is the change, the increase of the use of alternative fuels and biomass fuels from 90% in 2050 to 95%. Today we are at 50%, 53% in fact, 2022. So it seems easy. From 53 to 95 in 25 years should be easy. The challenge is that you have to run a kiln at 95% of alternative fuels. More complicated materials, more complicated fuels than the traditional fossil fuels. So for me, from a technical perspective, 95 is only 5% plus, but in practice it will mean a lot for the plants and how to operate, apart from the availability of the materials, which comes on top of it. The second element that I mentioned, and was also coming from the poll, is the issue of the clinker substitution. We, in our roadmap, we have the ambition to reduce the clinker to cement ratio from today 77, 75% to 60% in 2050. That's a lot. That's especially a lot when you assume that the cement production, the cement demand, will be stable at the same level as today. We are talking about 66 million tons of materials that we need, not clinker, 66 million tons materials that we need in 2050. And that 66 million tons is without fly ash, because there will be no coal-fired power plants anymore in 2050. It will be with a lot of less blast furnace slag, because the blast furnaces are changing operation without producing blast furnace slag. And these 2 elements, these 2 materials are now key. Calcined clay is an option. That is interesting from a technical perspective, but the challenge for Europe is that the clay that you need for the production of calcined clay is not that much available in Europe as in other places like India or South America. The last one that I wanted to mention is the carbon capture. We covered that already a little bit. Carbon capture is for us a very important lever, a very important technology to be used for the carbon reductions. What we also have to keep in mind is when we do that, we are looking at the innovation of the sector, because it means, I might come back on that later, it means at the end that the 200 plants in Europe that are now producing cement and clinker have to be changed all into new processes. And on top comes then the carbon capture to these 200 plants. That's a lot. And that is a limitation. And for that we need really the innovation going forward and supporting on this. I think that I've covered most issues on this.
Okay, let's pick up on carbon capture. Indeed, that emerged from our audience today as the key lever for more than half of those joining us. You've outlined some of the challenge. You say 200 plants would need to be fitted out with carbon capture technology. From what I've seen in the roadmap, it is also in the roadmap the technology that is projected to deliver the greatest share of emissions reductions going forward. So it's pretty crucial. So is that well, is that realistic, and how, I guess, what are you going to tell me you need for that to actually happen in real life?
Yeah, one of the issues why we needed the update of the roadmap is that we assumed 4 years ago, a little bit longer ago, we assumed that in 2030 perhaps 2 plants would be operating with carbon capture. Now we see that according to the forecast, and also coming from the Innovation Fund projects, we see that about 14 to 15 million tons of CO2 will be captured by the cement industry in 2030. So a huge amount, about 1/3 of the total capture volume in Europe. And that is because many projects have been launched by the companies and the countries everywhere in Europe. Normally, you would expect that it's only done in Northern and Western Europe, but we see projects in Greece, we see them in Poland, we see them in Romania, Bulgaria, in fact, everywhere, Spain, France, name it, we see everywhere projects starting. Some of them are just starting, but we have that 14 million, in fact, in portfolio. The second target that I would see is that for 2050, we assume in our roadmap, that is in fact our projection for 2050, we assume that a significant part of all the CO2 that is released during the process of cement production will be captured. Not all, but a significant part. And that results at the end in that net zero position of the cement industry in 2050, and over the value chain, the projected negative emissions. Important for this, because this is all nice and beautiful, but there are a lot of things behind this. It's the technology development that has to be done, because the technologies that we have today have to be implemented in 2050 at a much larger scale. We need the equipment supplies delivering that. We need the CO2 being transported. 62 million tons of CO2 being transported in 2050. It's quite a challenge, I think. We have to have the permits. Keep in mind, we have 200 cement plants. When they all are going to have a carbon capture installation in the next 25 years, it means that all permits will have to be updated, changed, with all the consequences. Don't forget also that we need renewable energy for this. So I really think this is a major step, what we have put down in the roadmap, but there is a lot to be done.
Okay, we can come back to CCUS. I'm sure I can think of a few more questions around that. But let's move now to the second of your 3 key changes, if you like, in the roadmap update, which is clinker substitution, which indeed came out second priority in the poll. 21% of people saying they see that as the key driver going forward. There are companies out there who say 60%, great, we can go down to as little as 20% clinker. You've already said you see a challenge in terms of availability of alternative materials. I guess tell us a little bit more how you've ended up at this projection of 60% and whether there's margin to be optimistic, and I guess ultimately for that to be dialed up in years to come.
I'm optimistic on this part. Some time ago, I was looking at all these data from the old roadmap, 65%. It was really challenging to go further down, but we have, thanks to market studies, but also input from our technical specialists, we have found the possibility to go to an average value of 60%, because that's important. It is not a cement type with 5% clinker. They exist and are produced by the cement industry today. But we also have cement types with 95% clinker, and they are asked by the market. They want to have that. And there are reasons for it. That is complicated to tell, but there are many reasons why the cement market does want to have these different products, and not only the low carbon or perhaps the carbon neutral cements. Anyhow, 60% at the level of 2050 means that about 66 million tons of materials that we need. And I'm sorry, the blast furnace slag that we now have is about, I would say, 60 million tons. 75% will be away in 2050, leaving 4 million tons. So all the people mentioning that we should have cements based on blast furnace slag, nice, but there is really a limited potential. Fly ash, mentioned before by me, it will not be available anymore. So we have to go to new materials, calcined clay, okay, limited availability of the natural raw material in Europe, so that makes it more difficult. Also, when you use calcined clay, it means that you have an additional CO2 emission that you have to capture. You have to have an additional energy input that you have to take care of. And then you come on new materials and existing materials that you can use in cement. From that perspective, we came to the conclusion that 60% is an ambitious level. Some countries are now already far below, but the average in Europe, this is really a big step. And we also are sure that at that moment, and that is a step that we have to keep in mind, we are not producing cement for producing cement. The cement is used in construction. So you have to have a quality product that can be used in the construction and that can be used without any problem, and that will stay in the product, in the construction sector, and for the next 100, 200 years. It has to be durable, and it has to be net zero. So we have a lot of challenges in that perspective. At the end, the limitation is the availability of the materials.
Okay. Okay, and the third one, alternative fuel use. So there you pointed out we're at 53% alternative fuels in use today. And I saw the roadmap notes that that's up from a mere 2% in 1990. So that's obviously a huge leap forward. And now the projection is no longer 90%, but as much as 95% in 2050. So of the three, is this the easiest box to tick?
I would not say it, because when you are operating a kiln, and I've done that in the past, when you are operating a kiln and you have to change your traditional fuels, say coal or petcokes, and you have to change them to alternative fuels, you get a lot of complications added to that. It is different type of materials, different heating values, different behavior in the kiln, and at the end, a different type of clinker when you don't operate it in a good way. And that means consequences for cement quality. So from 90 to 95% is a big step. It is also a significant volume. We are talking about, I would say, 20 million tons of fuels, of materials that are being used in 2050 in our cement kilns. So waste materials that can be reused, recycled, recovered, whatever you call it. We call it co-processing in the cement industry. 20 million tons. Compared to the waste incinerator sector, it's not that much, but it is an important threshold. And the nice thing about it is done without producing any waste. All the materials that we put in are either converted in energy, because it's a fuel, or is converted in the cement as a product at the end. So I think it's possible. But I wanted to also to highlight that we are not only using in 2050, 20 million tons of alternative fuels, including biomass. We are using the 66 million tons of clinker substitutes, which is a significant volume and mainly also waste materials. We are using about 60 million tons of alternative raw materials in clinker production. And I had one else, but I've forgotten it, what that one is. So
Come back to it.
Quite a significant volume, in fact.
Can I just add one point to that, which was on the slide as well, and I didn't mention it under the regulatory drivers, but on that point, access to sustainable biomass will be crucial. I mean, the continued zero rating for biomass under ETS will be essential to achieve our ambition by 2050 as well. So I just wanted to add that.
Presumably it's that underpins ultimately the possibility of reaching net zero by 2050 yes. and negative emissions down the value chain.
Yes. Correct.
Biomass plus the carbon capture.
Yeah, in fact, without the biomass use in cement, it will be extremely difficult, perhaps even impossible to reach net zero in 2050. So it is really something that we need.
We can definitely come back to all these points. I think there's definitely room for discussion on all of these, and it's great to have an expert who's actually written part of the roadmap, and then Koen obviously with the long experience of how this translates into, or how this needs to translate into policy. We're going to turn to our European Commission representative in just a second. Before we do, one more polling question to those of you joining us today. And we're moving here then from the technology from technology to policy. In your opinion, what is the most crucial area for quick wins when it comes to policies that support industry's transformation decarbonisation. And in this case, you've got no fewer than 8 options to choose from. So once again, scroll down, and I realize how tempting it will be, or how hard it will be to pick just one. We're asking you to pick just one. We realize you probably think that's not the only one, but pick the one that you think is most important in terms of policy that can make a difference to decarbonise the cement sector. Again, we'll leave it open for a little while, and we'll come back to the results once we get going on the Q&A. A reminder that you can send in questions via the orange button down the bottom right-hand side of your screen. They'll come through to us, and we'll start answering some of those in just a moment. Before we do that, I'd like to give the floor to Alexandre Bacot, who joins us from the European Commission, DG Clima, where he's Director for Innovation for a low-carbon, resilient economy. Alexandre previously headed up the road transport unit at DG Clima, so I imagine that's CO2 emission standards for cars and trucks, never a dull moment there, I'm sure. He's also headed up work on monitoring, reporting, and verification, worked as an assistant to the Director General for Climate Action at the Commission, and previously worked over at DG Environment on industrial emissions and waste management. So, opening question to you. What's your take on this roadmap, and are you as enthusiastic and optimistic as these other two gentlemen?
Thank you, Sonia. And first I have to say that this is a very timely event and really a timely update of the roadmap by CEMBUREAU. We are really in the middle of a really new policy cycle, elections coming up very soon. So a lot is going to be discussed about policy priorities. And what is very clear is now we have, with the Fit for 55 package, a clear and predictable framework. So the question is not putting into question, I think, as Koen was saying about the Green Deal, about the climate neutrality objective that we have for Europe. The question is not about if we have to go there, it's very much about how we do that in a way that ensure the competitiveness of our industry, but also make sure that we have the right investment taking place. So it is a lot about implementation of what we have agreed. And that requires massive investment in many sectors of the economy, and a real need to engage all sectors of our economy. So I think the updated roadmap by CEMBUREAU is really timely, very much welcome, because we see an industry coming together, taking very seriously this objective of climate neutrality. It's, of course, a sector that is very important in terms of emissions. I think it represents about 4% of total EU emissions, but also a very important sector from the economic point of view. So what I've noted in the updated roadmap is first this increase of ambition. So that's of course welcome from our perspective. But also what is very interesting is the life cycle approach that is taken in this roadmap. So it is really looking at the whole value chain, from the production of clinkers, cement, concrete, but also looking at the construction, the circularity, and the very important role that the sector can play in that context. Also, the importance given to innovation. Very nice to have all these projects being described in the roadmap. And also from our perspective, from policymakers, the policy needs. I think this is very timely. As I was saying, we are at the moment in the phase of reflection and really listening to what industry, what stakeholders, what member states have to say on how we can make the best possible legal framework, regulatory framework to have this transition as a success. We'll have in the next couple of years a number of, I would say, rendezvous from a policy perspective. First, the proposal in terms of the 2040 targets. Then will come a couple of reviews of the legislation, including the ETS, and the MFF, so the budget for the EU will also be looked at. So all of that should help us to design the best, I would say, regulatory and financial framework, so that, as I said, we can make this transition a real success for Europe and for industry.
Okay, thank you. One or two follow-ups then before I suggest we go into a more open discussion. One of those also, so given your role, is around the funding for innovation. So there's some very specific proposals from CEMBUREAU. I noted one, the fact that they're going to be spending 80 to 100 billion on ETS allowances over the next 10 years. And the suggestion is that 3/4 of that, or give or take a few billion, is front-loaded into a specific fund for the sector that can serve to fund innovation. A second one is an innovation fund that's more focused on deployment. A third one was something like a one-stop shop, bringing European national funds together, looking at CapEx and OpEx. Can you give a comment on some of these specific proposals? Are they attractive? I don't know. Are there pitfalls? What do you think of them?
Yes, no, thanks a lot. First of all, I'm very happy to see, the enthusiasm around the innovation fund. I must say, this is indeed a very important program. I would say a flagship program to support decarbonization in industry. It's about 40 billion euros until the end of this decade, and we see a lot of interest from industry. And I think, as Koen was saying, a large number of very good projects that are coming to our processes, our calls. So if we look now a bit deeper into how much the Innovation Fund can support and contribute to the transformation of the cement industry, I must say that, first of all, the cement, I would say, manufacturers have been a key players since the start of the Innovation Fund. I would say a big bravo to the applicants in this sector, because the success rate is very big, I would say, for the sector. Now, I was looking at the numbers. There are 26 CCS and CCU projects being supported with the Innovation Fund out of a total of 100. So we are close to 25% for a budget of 3.3 billion euros. So nearly also half of what has been already disbursed under the Innovation Fund. So I would say there is a clear innovation needed in the sector with CCS and CCU, and the Innovation Fund is really supporting that transformation, and we're really happy with that. Now, whether the Innovation Fund should be the only one to support the transition, clearly it is not possible. We know it's a fund that is available for all industry, including the clean tech manufacturing. So the competition is there. That's also the beauty of the tool. We have a very, I would say, cost-effective way of spending public money, putting in competition different technologies, looking at different ways of addressing the best projects. So we know what we will not be able to support all the very good projects that come out of the Innovation Fund. But we are looking at ways to address that, and one of them is to pool resources from member states in particular, where we still need, I would say, public support. And that's what we are now starting to do, and I've started, I would say, successfully to start with the hydrogen auction that we did a couple of months ago, where we offered to member states the possibility to pool resources into the Innovation Fund, so that member states can also select these best projects on their territory. And we have the intention to do that, I would say, broader, with this idea of as a service, so providing the Innovation Fund as a tool for selecting the best projects, where member states, with in particular the revenues of the EU ETS, I think you mentioned this big amount of money that will be available to member states with the auctioning of allowances. This can be really used to, I would say, contribute to the rollout of the Innovation Fund. We also now start with the STEP. This is the Strategic Technologies for Europe platform. That's a new acronym that you have to learn, STEP. And this STEP will also give seal of sovereignty to projects that are really the best out of the Innovation Fund. And we will give this list to member states so that they also encourage to support this project. Now, there were also a couple of ideas from CEMBUREAU, whether we should have something more looking at deployment. And I must say that actually we have the tool for that. Now, the Innovation Fund is not only about innovation. It has innovation in the title, but in practice, it is a lot about also deployment. We do that for hydrogen. We will probably do that for batteries. CCS, as we saw many projects also being supported. So I wouldn't be too worried about the term, or the legal framework is there to really roll out technologies across Europe. The point on a one-stop shop and simplification, we take that with us. That's indeed a very important element. As I said, this linking EU funding, member state funding is important, and we want to work with member states on that, and also simplify the way applicants look at the innovation fund. There was also a point on a value chain approach. Yes, very much with CEMBUREAU on that. We see that many of the CCS and CCU projects are not just looking at the capture, but looking at the whole value chain, and we really encourage that. So I think we have, with Innovation Fund, a good basis. We will, of course, look at it again. We will evaluate the tool and continue to look into how best we can, as I said, serve the transition in the industry.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, you take away the point in the one-stop shop. You said innovation fund. Yes, it's innovation fund, but it does and it will support deployment as well, and specifically on the front loading of ETS allowance payments into a fund, in this case, for the cement sector.
Yeah, I mean, if I would be going to other events with other industries, everybody wants a fund dedicated to their own industry. So you have the maritime fund, you have the steel fund,
exactly,
the cement fund.
With their funds. So
many little funds. So I think what we want is to maintain, I would say, this cross-cutting approach of the Innovation Fund, because as we also see for CCS, for instance, that is so important for the cement industry. This is also looking at the whole value chain, and many industries are also interested in CCS. So how could we, target only cement? I think that might be a bit difficult, but okay, we're going to look into that.
Okay, we can come back to that. I'm sure Koen and Rob would have more arguments to make for why an additional cement sector specific fund.
Can I just come back on? There was also a point on capex, opex.
Yeah.
But yes, the Innovation Fund already covers both OPEX and CAPEX. We are looking at the funding gap of projects, and that looks during the 10 years of operation of a project of all the costs. So I don't think we need to, again, change the rules here. It is about better explaining, I'm sure, but here we cover already OPEX and CAPEX with the Innovation Fund.
Okay. Koen and Rob, I'll give you a chance to come back in a moment. Just one more question to you, Alexandre, which is around industrial policy. So we've all spent the last 5 years talking a lot about the Green Deal, and increasingly we find ourselves talking about an industrial deal or a green industrial deal, if you want to wrap it all up into one. I guess, can you give us your take on that, and how can the introduction of or an increased emphasis, I suppose, on the industrial dimension as part of the Green Deal, how can that help make the business case for the kinds of investments that the CEMBUREAU roadmap implies? And as far as you are able to, concretely, what can we expect in terms of policy to then make that business case a reality?
So first of all, it would be for the next commission to decide.
Obviously, I know you're going to say that.
I don't have a crystal ball, and I don't know the elections results and what the new president will decide. But what is very clear, and we see that also with the Antwerp Declaration and also the political parties in the parliament calling a lot for this aspect of industrial deal or green industrial deal. So looking at how can we strengthen the competitiveness of our industry in an environment where we have to go towards climate neutrality. And I think things have changed quite a lot during the last years. I think now we see also competition outside Europe on this clean tech. So we are not alone in this transition. On the contrary, and we see, for instance, in the US or in China, a lot of support is given to the transition in a number of sectors in the net zero industrial, I would say, transition. So to ensure that Europe maintains its leadership is indeed very important, and I'm sure this will be part of the reflection of the next Commission.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to have a look at the answers that have come in to our poll, and then I'll give Rob and Kuna a chance to respond to some of the, to Alexandra's reaction. But this perhaps feeds into that. So in this case, the answers are relatively spread out, which perhaps isn't a surprise since all of these policy levers are, I imagine, considered important. But let me have a look. There are two that have come out on top, each of them with 23% of the votes. One of them is lay out a clear financing and permitting plan for CO2 transport and storage. So that ties into the CCUS technology lever. And the second one, also with 23%, is create a dedicated cement decarbonisation fund from future ETS revenues for front-loading decarbonisation investments. So both of those have come out on top, as I said, with 23% each. And let me see, after that, we've got implement a watertight EU carbon border adjustment mechanism, i.e. CBAM, which comes back, Alexandre, I think to what you just said, the fact that there is an increasing awareness perhaps of the bite of international competition and the importance of what happens in terms of imports and exports. So with those results in mind, Koen, Rob, do you want to come back?
I mean, thank you, Alexander, for the comments, and I think we're looking forward to a constructive discussion on each of the points that you said. But maybe let me come back to, indeed, the request for a front-loading into front ETS into a cement fund. I know it's somewhat of a provocative proposal, but at the same time, we're looking into the ETS directive, which says that part of the innovation fund should go to CBAM sectors. There are not that many CBAM sectors, so I think there are 4 CBAM sectors. So I think that's already somewhat of a ring fencing of the funding. The second point I would say is that we did see over time that there was somewhat, if you allow me the term, a little bit of a cannibalization of the innovation fund for a variety of purposes. I mean, DAC is in there, maritime is in there, aviation is in there, in addition to renewables, energy efficiency, but also the energy intensive sector. So I think there is a variety of objectives which is there under the innovation fund, and we would like to make sure that there is indeed that funding for the energy intensive sectors and more specifically for the cement sector. But I do see your point that you made before. On CapEx, OpEx, I fully agree with you on the innovation fund, but that's not necessarily the case for all the funding programs. And that comes back to what I said before. If we were to have a one-stop shop, it would allow us to then have a clearer view on where is the OpEx included, because, as I said before, that will become a very important part of the costs going forward. I would like to see a little bit more clarity as well on the contracts for difference, which I think is a useful de-risking instrument, but still lacks a little bit of preciseness when it comes to its application. I know that some member states have elaborated on that, but I think it's important to continue focusing on that. And then the last point I wanted to mention, and Sonia mentioned it as well, in all of this, and then I'm coming back to the regulatory requirements, permitting is going to be a key issue, and you addressed it in the Net Zero Industry Act. I think it's not only for the carbon capture and storage development, but also in the area of energy, for instance. We have companies that are saying, on my plant area, on the industrial site, I could put a renewable asset, but it takes me 4 or 5 years to get the permit. Now, can we have a sort of sandbox or simplified permitting regime for on-site installation of renewable assets? I think that's one of the recommendations we do as well, and I would like to add that to the regulatory requirements.
Okay, yeah, Rob.
One issue that I would like to highlight is the business case part of the work to be done. When you want to decarbonize a sector like the cement industry, you need at the end to have a business case for the measures that have to be done. So we are talking about big money, really big volumes of money that are needed for the investments, meaning at the end that the cement price, when taking into account the CO2 costs, including capex, opex, will double, perhaps triple. That only makes sense when you have a business case for that type of investments, that type of change of a sector. CBAM is fundamental for that, because if you can import the same cement without cost of CO2 to Europe, investments in Europe does not make sense. So that's one issue. But it is much more than only that. It really means also that the market, the lead market, has to be developed on that. And that brings me at the end also back to the issue, and I can't help it, everything is related in this business, to the infrastructure. Because we need, at the end, the infrastructure for the CO2, but that's not the only one. We need renewable energy to go to the cement plants, much more than we have today, because the decarbonization of the cement sector will cost additional electrical energy, and that must be renewable, of course, no escape. We need pipeline for CO2, we need perhaps railway tracks for CO2, but we also need to reuse, recycle the concrete waste that is liberated in Europe. And that has to come back to the cement plants. We need alternative fuels, so we need a lot of things to be done on infrastructure. And I think that is related, perhaps the connection is a little bit strange, but it is connected to the situation that we need to have a business case. Because if you want to recycle 100% of the concrete waste being generated in Europe, that must be feasible from an economical perspective, because otherwise it is not done. It's landfilled, and that's the current status partly, and that should not be.
And what do you propose from a policy perspective to enable that business case for the recycling and so forth?
I think that one of the issues that we really have to work much better together is on industry and governments on how do we recycle the materials, how do we guarantee that valuable waste streams are recycled in industry, reused in industry, for instance in cement. So landfilling concrete waste should be forbidden. The concrete waste should be used preferable first in cement. Okay, there are quality limitations on that, so part of that can be used directly in cement, and the rest should be used as replacement of virgin raw materials in concrete, replacing aggregates, sand, gravel, that type of material. And it is possible. We see that. Only we need policy framework stimulating this.
Okay. Well, lots of points there, Alexandre. I wanted to come back to you. Maybe just first on the front loading of ETS spend, since that came out as a top priority for people joining us. And Koen said, yes, we get the innovation fund, it works, we definitely want to keep it, but we see scope, and as you said, I think the cement sector is not the only one, for a separate fund funded by us, for us, sort of borrowing against the future. I don't know, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but is this something that you think, the Commission or policymakers are open to as a possibility to at least discuss the merits of going forward?
Thank you. First of all, I was happy to hear from Koen that the cement fund is a bit of provocative kind of call. So I take it's more like looking at the whole energy-intensive industries, and there we have a particular focus, of course, in keeping the right balance in between the various sectors that are covered by the Innovation Fund. This is also asked by us by the co-legislator when the last ETS was reviewed. So we are keeping good track of that. And I must say, at the moment, the CBAM sectors are well covered by the Innovation Fund, so I think we are not out of balance. But we will look at that, in particular when free allowances will start to decrease. So we will watch that, I would say, well. But also keeping in mind that there is a need also for supporting the transition in many other sectors. So yeah, this is what I would say at this stage.
What about CBAM? The way I understand it, CBAM, the way you talk about it, is also crucial for the development of something like CCUS.
Oh yeah.
By the sector. So it comes into it, and
it's relatively simple. If you decarbonize a cement plant, it will cost hundreds of millions of euros. That investment has to come back in some way. At the moment that someone else can import cement without CO2 cost, without doing these investments, there is a business model for the import.
Yeah.
That can't be.
Yeah.
So it is fundamental for the decarbonization, not only for cement, I would say, but in general for the European industry. It is fundamental that at the end, imports will be focused, will be confronted with the same level of CO2 cost as the industry in Europe.
That is the plan.
And that's CBAM.
And that's the plan.
CBAM,
So are we sorted? Can we?
Now, yeah, it's not
Yeah,
yet
I think
watertight.
it's coming down to indeed the water tightness and the effectiveness, but I think it's important also to mention that we talk about CBAM, it has a twin objective. I mean, it's driving down emissions in the third countries and it's incentivizing third countries to do their part of the equation, but it's also making sure that when their products are imported into Europe and have a carbon footprint which is higher than the level which is determined for European operators, that there is that level playing field. And that's what we're talking about. The level playing field allows us to invest in all types of technologies. We're not only talking about carbon capture and use and storage, we're talking about the different levers that we have along the 5C value chain. All companies will need to do investments, and I'm not limiting it to carbon capture and storage and use.
Yeah. Alexandre, can you, I guess, how can we have a watertight CBAM, or how do we get as close to that as
yes,
possible?
Yes, we can and we will.
Good, right answer.
That's, I mean, a clear priority for the Commission now to implement CBAM, so that it is indeed a very effective way to ensure level playing field. So, I mean, the work is not just with DG Klima, it's DG Taxud in the lead, but we are working closely with them to ensure that we have this important instrument in the toolbox and available as soon as required.
Okay. We have a couple of questions that have come in, and we would welcome more, so do send those in if you have any, if you're joining us today. One of them, since we were just talking about CCUS, pertains to that. The questioner says, the cement industry plays a key role in developing CCUS. How will the sector welcome other smaller emitters of other sectors to access this technology in terms of access to infrastructure, sharing knowledge, etc.? I'd maybe tack on, I guess, Rob, you might be the best place to answer this. I'd maybe tack on to that. Yeah, I don't know if you can, you've talked about the roadmap and how it relates to the earlier edition back in 2020. Where does it position you today in terms of also vis-a-vis other sectors? The question clearly says on CCUS, we see you as a leader. So, how about bringing in others? But maybe, yeah, a few words on where this roadmap positions you as a sector, the way you see it.
It's a challenging discussion, of course. It really seems that thanks to all the efforts in the cement industry in Europe is really front runner in the discussions in the development of CCUS projects. And that's nice. And what I said before is for that we need infrastructure. But infrastructure, the cement plants are normally not located directly to a storage facility or a place where this CO2 can be used. So we need infrastructure with pipelines. There is no question about that the pipeline for only a cement plant doesn't make sense. There is no question. That is simply not the case. You think that the cement emissions are huge. They are not small, I would say, but the typical cement plant emission in Europe is less than 1 million tons. And there are installations producing much more CO2. So for a pipeline to transport 1 million tons of CO2 per year, sorry, that doesn't make sense. You want to have more. So clustering sources of CO2 makes sense, should be done. And that's one of the questions that we also have in the industrial carbon management discussions. We want to have transparency on the storage, transparency on the hubs that will collect the CO2 and on the transport facilities. That is for us. So it is from a cement perspective, okay, we are good at the start of this discussion. We are there, we are doing these projects, but it is for everyone, including ourselves, important.
If I may just add to that, I think it's important indeed. We are developing the capture technology. Capturing CO2 is a task that we have. But there is also indeed the pipelines and the transport. And there, coming back to the question that was asked, of course, we need other players to be active in that domain, and we are happy to team up. If you look at the next Net Zero Industry Act, it's all about fair access to infrastructure. And that is indeed true for the existing storage sites and the pipelines. We need to have access, not only us, but I think all players that want to make use of these pipelines for the transport of CO2. So I think it's a fair question, yes.
Maybe just to add a few points. First of all, I think the cement industry is doing indeed a very important role in terms of capturing CO2. And with the Innovation Fund project, we see that about 10 million tons of CO2 would be captured with all these projects being realized. But the bottleneck is very much about transport and storage. And this is why we have proposed and now adopted this Net Zero Industrial Act with the 50 million tons obligation for storage capacity in Europe. And that's a very important, I would say, step in mandating oil and gas industry to put in place this storage. In terms of the transport, a lot still need to be done, and the investment are also massive. So together with the colleagues in DG Energy, we're looking at how to really have the best possible regulatory framework for the transport, including this fair access to the transport means. And what we will be also putting in place in the next years is what we call an aggregation platform, where both, I would say, the supplier and the demandeur of the CO2 will be able to meet in terms of what can be done to make sure that this value chain talk to each other, and that indeed the smaller players can also have their role to play in rolling out this new market, because now we're talking about really shaping up a new market, and this is a very important one. We need to have a market that functions very well with clear rules, but also where we have single market rules in place, so that all players can indeed have their role. Also, what Koen was saying in terms of the quality of the CO2 is a very important element, so that there is agreement in terms of what quality of CO2 is captured and then stored. And I think this is an area where we will need to continue working in terms of standardization, but also in between have agreement between the supply and the demand of the CO2. So I think there is still a lot of work ahead of us, but with the industrial carbon management strategy, I think we've been able to shape, I would say, at least the main elements that needs to be put together to make this market really a success.
Okay, maybe just think of a quick follow-up on the CCUS, the U part, the use part. Can you give us a sense, Rob, of what, how big potentially is this use part, and are we on track to, so beyond the storage and the transport, for a regulatory framework that ultimately creates a business case that incentivizes that use part, if it is indeed a substantial opportunity going forward?
Thank you for this question, and it's really a very good question. Carbon capture and use is one of the issues that we have highlighted in our roadmap. In 2050, we assume that 25% of the captured emissions, so 25% of our CO2 will be used. And there are two places, products that we want to produce at the end. One is that we will use them for mineralization and recarbonation of the concrete, mineralization of aggregates and other products. That is about 10% of the CO2 that we want to use from the captured volume. The second, and that is the important part, is 15% of the CO2 that we want to capture. 50% we want to use for products, not ourselves, but we want to transfer it to other partners that will transfer them in perhaps fuels, in plastics, in other materials with a longer or very long permanent status. The challenge for us today is that is in the EU ETS blocked. The use of CO2 in other products is not recognized as a CO2 emission reduction in the cement industry. So when we capture that 15% of CO2, it is today still an emission. And that is not right, because it reduces CO2 from the cement plant, and it reduces at the end also the use of other materials, including fossil fuels for products like plastics. So from that perspective, we want to have the recognition of carbon capture and use back in the EU ETS as an emission reduction.
I mean, there is that accounting issue that Rob is just mentioning, but I think the other point is, if you're looking at carbon use, and mineralization is one type of use, but then you're looking into, for instance, aviation fuels, or you're looking into use in plastics, there is a debate of what is considered to be permanent. And that debate takes place both in the EU ETS, and that is linked to the surrendering obligation, which is important. And then it's also part of the carbon removals legislation. And we need to be part of that whole discussion on the CO2 use because we're going to need CO2 from a variety of sources. If you look at 2050, and we did a study on that with VITO, the Flemish Research Institute, that is looking at between 280 and 415 million tons of CO2 that will be needed for a variety of applications. Now, we're not probably going to get there with biogenic only and direct air capture only, so we will need access to industrial CO2 sources. And the fact that in 2040 the use for aviation fuels has been cut off by the RFNBO Act has halted and put to a stop some of our investments. And I think that's an important issue. I know there's a review clause now, but that needs to be addressed going forward.
You're in the unenviable position of getting to react to this.
Yeah.
A prolonged use of industrially sourced CO2 and recognition that CO2 captured and used, that counts as an emission reduction for, in this case, the cement sector. Are those plausible realities?
First of all, let me say that I fully agree with Koen. I think we will need CO2 in the future in our economy. So we can be climate neutral, but we'll still need CO2 in particular for producing chemicals and other fuels. So having a way to have CCU in place is very important. So I think on that we share the same vision. Now what can be done? So first of all, the ETS directive gives an equal footing between a permanent CCU and CCS. And this is now being put in place with a new implementing act that will be published by the summer, during the summer. So that's, I would say, not the simple, but it's the easiest way to address when the carbon is being captured permanently and is not released into the atmosphere. Now, when the carbon that is captured is used, for instance, to produce fuels like RFNBOs, and then released into the atmosphere, the question is, where and how to account that. In the Delegated Act related to RFNBO, what is put in place is that the carbon that is captured from processed emissions, for instance, in the cement sector, will not have to surrender allowances until the year 2040, because when we look at climate neutrality, so in the long term, these emissions into the air from the fuels will have to come from biogenic source of carbon or carbon captured from the air. So we will be looking at that in the next review, as Koen was saying, but this is the legal framework that is needed at this stage to ensure climate neutrality. Now, the question of CCU and the ETS in, for instance, the use of carbon in plastic, there we will have a review also in 2026 on whether the carbon needs to be accounted at the point of emissions or at the point of capture. And I think there we will have another, I would say, look at it. But what matters at the end of the day is that we are able to really trace and account the CO2, because what we need also to keep in mind is at the end, like in the CCU vision of an industry, all this carbon will be, ending in the same pipeline, in the same process in the chemical sector. So we need to have a very good accounting rules, and we will be looking at that carefully in the next couple of years, together, of course, with stakeholders.
Okay. We've had a whole bunch of questions come in, so thank you. So we're going to change tack slightly. One for you, Rob, about alternative binders. Does the cement industry see itself as the hub where alternative binders will be developed and promoted, or is that likely to be left to startups/academia? You can be brief in your...
Yeah, I will be very brief. I think that it is being done by the cement industry anyhow already. All the cement companies are working on new materials, on new clinker substitution materials, and even new types of cement. So it's done by the industry, clear. it is also being done and developed and promoted by startups and innovation clubs, and it is beautiful. And at the end, you see that coming together. An example, just as an example, the Global Cement and Concrete Association has its own innovation hub, Innovandi. They had last week, I think, their meeting, and you see a lot of startups working together with traditional cement industry, working on new products. So it's happening. Okay. Everyone is working on it, because if you don't have to pay the CO2, you are the winner. That's simple.
Okay, clear. A question too around sustainable biomass, and this is another one for you, I think. If upscaling sustainable biomass is critical as an alternative fuel source for cement kilns, where does the industry envisage the sustainable biomass coming from? I imagine behind that question is the idea that there is a lot of interest from a lot of sectors in sustainable biomass going forward.
The good point of the cement industry, and I mentioned that already, is that we are able to use alternative fuels without any waste outlet at the end. We produce, so the alternative fuels that we use are generating the energy for the clinker production and generating the inorganic components that are incorporated in the cement matrix, so they become cement. And that is the same for biomass. So biomass materials, for instance, from waste, municipal waste, sorted municipal waste, the biomass materials can be used in cement without having any other waste coming out of the cement plant. So that is, for me, the possibility that we have to explore. It is really not looking at biofuels, that type of biocrops, all that material. That is not the target for the cement industry. Cement industry will look at mixed materials, mixed waste, fossil part, waste material part, municipal waste, plus biomass elements in it that can be used in the clinker production.
Okay. So it's basically looking at sustainable biomass as a component. I think you said half of the alternative fuel that you envisage in 2050 would be bio. Yeah,
it would be accounted as bio. So it might be that 100% of the material is in fact the same material, but half of it will be biomass.
Okay. But you're basically looking at waste that wouldn't have an obvious alternative use. So I don't know, it could contain hazardous material. It could be something which needs to go into a cement kiln rather than having a potential use.
It sounds that we can use everything. That's not the case. The condition is it must be safe, it must be environmental safe and all that, but also the important one, and that's the fundamental one for every cement plant, you have to produce cement. So the cement quality is the key driver. If you can't produce cement, you don't use it.
Okay, thank you. Koen, a few questions for you too. Well, one in particular, which comes back to your point about finding a solution for exports, that we need to find more solutions for exporting cement industry products. However, the questioner says exporting products also generates CO2 emissions. So isn't it counterintuitive when we're talking about decarbonisation?
No, I don't think so, because actually it's exporting on the basis of you have European products that have to comply with the specific requirements of producing in Europe. And exporting is all about creating again, and that's then the reverse of the internal market in which imports is happening. For exports, it's all about creating that level playing field on the export market, where in fact the local players are not subject to a CO2 charge. I mean, here it's about a CO2 charge that is applied to European operators, but that don't have a level playing field with the third-party operators. And I think it's all about, again, creating that level playing field with third-party operators.
Okay, thank you. And then there's a couple of questions around the demand side. I think you said earlier the projection in the roadmap is for cement demand for cement to stay roughly the same. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe interesting to hear a bit more about your assumptions on what happens to cement, to concrete. Obviously, ultimately, can we build with less cement? Can we build with less concrete? How do those different materials evolve in your roadmap? And the questions, and Koen, this may be relevant for you too, the questions are, one, in which time frame would you expect the carbon contract for difference to become less crucial, i.e. CCUS, the cost of CCUS is lower than the carbon price? And secondly, will the construction industry be able to absorb the new price of cement? a doubling, the questionnaire suggests, taking into account the new carbon constraints and the related capex, opex costs. So all of that a little bit on the demand side.
A lot of questions at the same time.
Of the
so
equation.
let's start from the cement demand. So what we have in our roadmap, and that has not changed compared to before, we have a significant reduction of the cement content in concrete. That was already in our plan, and that is continued. And that is the first step, because you start with cement in concrete, and then the next step is that you use the concrete in construction. We also assume in our roadmap that a significant reduction of the concrete content in construction will happen. And then the question is, does that lead to a reduction in cement, an increase in cement, or whatever? And the challenge is, for that, we have really a lot of challenges in the forecasting, the long-term forecasting of the construction demand and the role of concrete in that demand. Because we see renovation of buildings being needed, and for that we need the concrete. We need also concrete and for the construction of infrastructure. And now, again, I can't say it with a smile, because it is really a pity what is happening. The floodings that we see over in Europe at the moment, it really indicates that we need a more resilient society with housing, with working on floods in rivers and the sea. And for that, I think that we need concrete. So saying that we expect an increase of cement demand, we have said we assume on basis of all these developments, so reduction in concrete content, reduction of concrete content in construction, and at the same time a higher demand for constructions in concrete, with concrete, we expect a stabilized cement production level, cement demand from now till 2050, but there might be fluctuations and even an increase. And that, related to a question earlier, what does that mean for the clinker substitution? It means that clinker substitution is not an easy issue. Second question, I think that it's more related for relevant.
Well, happy to take that one, but I think we are upbeat about the future of our industry. I mean, Rob was talking about indeed the assumption, the roadmap that we have to say we're going to keep the production level constant. But we also mentioned in the roadmap update that we foresee an increase of the market, and it is because we are upbeat about the market. Yes, there will be an efficiency in the use of our product, but that is going to be outweighed by the market demand and the market growth. We think indeed, as Rob was mentioning, infrastructure, but also enabling the construction of renewable assets or low carbon assets. You look at windmills, wind turbines, you look at dams, all these will be constructed with concrete. So we are optimistic and upbeat about the future. The two other questions that were asked, very briefly, and just to give an indication, you talked about what is the time frame for the development and where are you going to be able to no longer have to make use of CFDs. CFDs, first of all, is indeed de-risking, and I would say in a time frame between 10-15 years for breakthrough technologies. That's more or less what we need. We need to go through that period to really get the development of the technologies. Second question was indeed, what about the increased prices? Is there going to be increased price? Will the market take that up? I think that's coming back to the whole discussion about uptake of low carbon products. We know that the uptake of low carbon products will probably go hand in hand with an increased cost and an increased price. And I think that's something where we also look at how will public procurement markets develop. But on the other hand, we also look at what is going to be the cost of material in the end product? And when you look at the cost of material, the building material in, for instance, the construction of a building, it's not that huge. So I think all these elements need to be taken into account in looking at the possibility and the potential to look at the low carbon cost going forward.
Okay, I've got a follow-up that just came in, and Alexander, I'll come to you for maybe an opinion on that too. How do you see the role of standards and public procurement on decarbonisation?
Yes, I think that's indeed a very good question, because as also Koen was saying, procurement will be essential to drive the demand for low carbon products. And there, I guess also the reflection internally in the Commission will help into designing a good policy framework. We have also now with the EPBD, so the efficiency, performance buildings directive, we have now also a tool that will help calculating the life cycle carbon emissions of new buildings. Member states will have to publish by 2027 a roadmap for setting also limit values on the carbon life cycle of new buildings. And also with the new construction product regulation, we'll have also coming to mandatory climate footprint information. So all of this will help to create a lead market for low carbon products. And of course, creating the demand with public procurement will be very important. And the work that is being done on standardization will also be very key.
So you're nodding, Koen.
But yes, I mean, I think one thing that you mentioned, which is very important, is indeed that life cycle approach. That's also why we looked at 5C approach, including decarbonation, because we're looking at buildings, but also built structures in general. What we want to make absolutely sure that is that policymakers do not make a choice in favor of one or another specific building material. I mean, we very much believe in material neutrality when it comes to policy making, and sometimes we see a little bit of a tendency to favor specific building materials. I think if we do look at a proper analysis of life cycles, then we can compete with any other building material, and that's not to denigrate any other one, but I think we have our place in the construction market with decarbonizing, and we have our firm place in the construction market.
Okay, one more technical one for you, Rob. The reduction of clinker in cement, you've said, is limited by the availability of alternative raw materials. Some companies claim and show most of the reduction could come from using more limestone to replace clinker. Since that's available as a technology, why not push that as a critical lever to decarbonize? And the questioner says that way we would avoid a need for quite so much CCUS.
Yeah, so it is a possibility to use ground limestone in cement as a replacement for clinker. But ground limestone is not binding. So when you put it together in a building, it is not delivering the strength of the concrete. So you need to combine it with a certain amount of clinker and perhaps some other materials, because there are also patents on using other materials to bind, to have that binder capacity of limestone coming in. Anyhow, in our roadmap, that is one of the major changes. We have added a lot of additional limestone into the, I would say, the average cement recipe in 2050. So when you look at what I said before, blast furnace slag fly ash going down, calcine clay going significantly up, but still that is not enough to deliver that, what I mentioned before, the 66 million tons of material that we need. A major part will come from limestone.
Okay.
But at the end, and that is the challenge, with that limestone and all the additions that you add to that, it has to be a binder that delivers a durable construction. That is a construction that lasts 100 or 200 years. And that will be the major challenge for all these developments with limestone and other materials.
Okay. There's a question too on your use of net emission figures. It's the first time you've included those.
Yeah.
I guess why, and what's your view on the value of those?
So in Europe, the system, the framework of the EU ETS is about cross emissions, taking into account all the emissions of a cement plant with the exception of the biomass fraction, because the biomass is CO2 neutral in that concept. In the concept that we have developed already a long time ago, we have said that the use of alternative fuels, and partly fossil fuels, is to be seen as a CO2 emission reduction. It is not recognized in Europe, but it's recognized by, at least not by the European Commission or the European institutes, but it's recognized by other players, other governments, and not less important, in Europe it is recognized in environmental product declarations and LCAs. So that is the reason we have said, okay, we calculate on gross, because that is the framework, that is the accounting basis for the EU ETS, for carbon removals, all that. But we report also net, because in our view, the net emissions have to be taken into account too.
Okay. And we have we had one question, and I'm conscious we're not going to have time for many, many more questions, but this one's been waiting a little while. We've been talking about the EU. Do we have a view on what's happening outside of the EU? And I guess the question is, where is the European cement industry vis-à-vis the rest of the world?
Well, I mean, let me say, first of all, that indeed we are proud with the progress we're making in Europe. And I think it's important for European Association, but also for the policymakers in Europe to be proud on what they achieve. I mean, to give one example, we have a 53% on average alternative fuel use. I think we are indeed one of the front runners globally on this. But this being said, we also have, as Rob mentioned, a global cement and concrete association that is looking at reducing emissions also in the cement sector. And in that association, there are also regional associations and companies. And many of our companies are global players. And these global players have their roadmaps that have been set out in terms of ambition for their decarbonisation path. So I think it's not a Europe-only exercise that we're doing when it comes to decarbonisation. It's an exercise that is happening throughout the world, but probably with different accents according to access to raw materials, access to infrastructure, access to electricity. So I think you can't really compare what is happening in other parts of the world one by one. You have to take into account the specific background in each jurisdiction, and that's what we do in Europe as well. So I think it's a global movement with different accents, I would say.
Sandra, I guess a final, same question to you. Do you have a sense of where we stand in Europe? I guess this is broader in terms of Green Deal, Industrial Deal, what it means for this type of sector vis-à-vis US, China are two obvious candidates, but also other parts of the world.
Not sufficiently into the cement business to really respond, but what I would like to stress is that now with this updated roadmap, we have a very, I would say, useful roadmap for the industry, and a lot will be to make it happen. So all these projects that are getting realized with financial investment decisions behind. So I think, as I was saying in my introduction, a lot will be about implementation of our projects, of our legislation, and I think we will be happy to continue to work with stakeholders to have the regulatory framework in place for that.
Okay, thank you very much. If you want to know more, you should see a pop-up on your screen now, which will take you through to the CEMBUREAU website and a copy of the roadmap. We have a couple more questions. One of those, how mature are the innovative projects being carried out? I think there's a QR code in the roadmap, which takes you through to a map of innovative projects across Europe within the sector. So questioner, I advise you to go and have a look at that. I'm sure the CEMBUREAU team is also at your disposal for any additional follow-up questions you may have. In addition, we invite you to share your feedback with us on today's webinar. You should see a link for that on your screen now as well. And with that, I'd like to thank our three speakers for today, Koen, Rob and Alexandre, very much for their participation, for your questions, and we would like this to be an ongoing conversation, so we look forward to seeing and speaking with you more in the nearby future. Thank you very much.